The moment I saw the foreclosure notice nailed to my front door, I knew exactly whose fingerprints were on it, even if the paper only bore the bank's seal. My son's smile, the one he wore when he thought he was being clever, flashed in my mind. David Mitchell. My only child. The man I had raised, the man I had fed, clothed, and prayed over. He had put me here, in front of this piece of paper that declared my home no longer mine. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's the story of how a 71-year-old widow lost everything, and how she made sure the very people who tried to erase her ended up paying rent to her instead. It was a sunny morning in Sarasota, the kind of day when the palms sway lazily and the neighborhood kids ride bikes barefoot in the street. My neighbors paused to glance as I bent down, my hands shaking, to pull the notice from the door. I straightened slowly, the weight of humiliation pressing down harder than the Florida heat. Final notice of foreclosure, it read. Outstanding balance, $180,000. My knees threatened to give out, but I forced myself to stay upright. You learn that in your 70s, dignity is half posture. My house wasn't just wood and shingles. It was the dream my late husband, Robert, and I had built together over 45 years of marriage. We had poured every cent of his contracting jobs, every coupon I clipped from the Sunday paper, into owning something that couldn't be taken from us. Or so I thought. When Robert died, the silence of that house nearly drowned me. I filled it with flowers, with books, with anything that made me feel like I wasn't just rattling around inside a mausoleum. And when my son suggested he help manage the finances, I thought it was love. Foolish me. I remember his exact words 6 months before that notice arrived. Mom, let me streamline things for you. You don't need to worry about all that paperwork. You've done enough. Everyone does it this way now. Everyone. Everyone apparently meant forging my name on loan documents. Everyone apparently meant using his mother's house as collateral for debts I'd never agreed to. Everyone apparently meant smiling at me across Sunday dinner, while the walls around me were already mortgaged to the hilt. And so here I was, a 71-year-old woman standing on her porch in her best Sunday blouse, reading that the home I thought was safe had been signed away behind my back. If you're still watching, don't scroll. Subscribe, because what happens next will make you question your own family. Neighbors love a scandal. Mrs. Parker across the street pretended to water her petunias while staring openly. Mr. Jenkins slowed his dog's walk so he could pass by twice. I ignored them, pressed the notice flat against my chest, and walked inside. The house felt different that day. Colder. Like it already knew it wasn't mine. I set the paper on the dining table where Robert and I had once celebrated anniversaries with store-bought cake and cheap champagne. The sunlight caught the gold lettering of Final Notice, making it look almost ceremonial. I sat down, folded my hands, and whispered into the empty room. You did this, David. There was no answer, of course. Just the tick of the grandfather clock Robert had restored with his own hands. The sound of time, indifferent as ever. Humiliation burns hottest in private. I didn't cry for the neighbors. I didn't cry for the banker who would one day smugly slide me paperwork to sign. But alone at that table I let the tears fall. Tears for the boy I'd raised alone after Robert's heart gave out too soon. Tears for the man who once clung to me during thunderstorms, now the same man who had signed away the roof over my head. Tears for the naive woman I had been, believing motherhood meant unconditional loyalty in return. By the time the tears dried, something harder had settled in their place. Resolve. David thought he had one. He thought he had taken my house, my security, my dignity, and buried them under numbers and contracts. What he didn't know was that I still had something left. My name. My will. My knowledge that sometimes the best revenge doesn't look like fire. Sometimes it looks like a deed. So I folded the notice carefully, slid it into the box of Robert's old papers, and stood up straighter than I had in months. This isn't over, I said aloud, my voice steady. And I meant it. Because the house David thought he had stolen was going to become my weapon. And one day, sooner than he realized, I would hand him his own set of keys. Not as a gift. As his landlord. And if you want to hear how foreclosure turned into fortune, make sure you're subscribed. The best part is still to come. My name is Eleanor Grace Mitchell. 71 years old. Widow. Sarasota, Florida. On paper, I'm the woman who should have been spending her days knitting afghans, hosting Sunday dinners, and waiting politely for grandchildren to visit. But I've never been much for doing what people expect. At my age, most women shrink into the wallpaper, afraid of making noise. I prefer to make sparks. I was born in 1952, raised in a world where women weren't expected to sign the checks, only to stretch them. My mother taught me how to turn one chicken into 3 meals and how to patch a dress so neatly no one would guess it had been worn by 2 sisters before me. Those were lessons in survival disguised as chores. I married Robert Mitchell at 24. He was a contractor with calloused hands and eyes full of plans. We didn't have much in those early years, but we had enough love, enough grit, enough stubbornness to keep moving forward when money ran out and bills piled up. Robert used to say, "We'll build slow, Ellie, but we'll build solid." And we did. A starter home bought with borrowed tools and sweat equity turned into a bigger one. Paychecks stretched. Coupons clipped. Every corner of our lives was built the hard way, honest brick by brick. By the time Robert passed, we had something people our age aren't supposed to. A home that was fully ours, not the bank's. I thought it was my fortress. But after he died, the house creaked differently without him there. And every sound felt like a reminder that I was alone. So when David, my only son, my pride, my boy I'd raised through scraped knees and teenage tantrums, offered to help, I said yes. He was married by then, to a woman named Vanessa who carried herself like a peacock and looked at me like I was background scenery. She called me Mom in public and the old lady behind my back. I pretended not to notice. For David's sake. Still, I told myself that family was family. That trust was the only thing that mattered. I wasn't naive. I knew the world had changed since Robert and I started out. Money moved differently. Everything was faster. David liked to remind me I was old-fashioned, as though saving receipts and paying bills on time were flaws. But I thought his eagerness to handle things came from love. That maybe finally, after decades of raising him alone, I could rest a little. The truth? I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe my son was still the little boy who crawled into my bed during thunderstorms and whispered, "Don't let go, Mom." So I didn't question too much. I told myself, this is what families do. They carry each other. Looking back, I can see the cracks already forming. The way Vanessa's eyes lingered on my silverware set. The way David asked too many questions about account balances. The way we'll handle it slowly replaced, "You don't have to worry." But denial is a powerful thing. I smoothed over every uneasy feeling with the same determination I once used to stretch a paycheck. I convinced myself that Robert would want me to accept their help. I had no idea then that the very people I trusted most were already writing the first lines of my downfall. And as I sat in my living room, sipping tea from the cup Robert always claimed was too delicate for a man's hands, I thought my life, though lonelier, was safe. I was wrong. Very wrong. Because soon enough what looked like love would turn out to be paperwork. And paperwork has sharp edges I didn't yet see coming. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in a neat folder dressed up as love. The first time David handed me papers, it was a Sunday evening. We just finished dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal I'd cooked 1,000 times. I was still clearing the dishes when he slid a folder across the table like it was a casual afterthought. "Mom," he said, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. "This will make things easier for you. No stress, no confusion. We'll handle the details." Vanessa sat beside him, her lipstick still perfect, her wineglass half full. She gave me a smile so sweet it made my teeth ache. "Think of it as security," she purred. "Families today prepare. Everyone does it. Everyone." That word always sounded harmless, but that night it felt like a trap. I flipped through the papers. A trust document. A medical directive. A power of attorney. All in one tidy packet, with important lines highlighted in cheerful yellow. "You don't need me to sign all this," I said, my voice cautious, sliding the folder back across the polished wood table. "Of course we do," Vanessa replied, her tone velvet over steel. "You'll thank us later." I didn't sign. Not that night. My gut told me to wait. But time wears people down. Especially when grief is fresh and loneliness is heavy. Over the next weeks they softened me. Vanessa arrived with flowers, setting them in the center of my kitchen table as if she were planting kindness itself. David put his hand on mine and said, "Mom, you've done enough. Let us carry things for a while." It looked like love, felt like relief, and I wanted so badly to believe it. So one evening, after too many restless nights and too much silence in Robert's half of the bed, I signed. Just a few papers. Just enough to make them happy. I thought it was trust. I thought it was family. 6 months later, the truth arrived in a stiff white envelope stamped by the bank. Outstanding balance, $180,000. Collateral, 112 Palm Drive. My home. My fortress. The place Robert and I had built brick by brick, coupon by coupon, promise by promise. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. Loans I'd never agreed to. Balances I'd never seen. All neatly tied to my name. I sat at the kitchen table, my tea cooling in front of me, staring at numbers that didn't belong to me. My fingers shook so badly I could hardly keep hold of the pages. And then I saw it. My name. In my handwriting. But it wasn't mine. The curve of the letters was off, the pressure of the pen uneven. A stranger's hand pretending to be mine. I pressed my palm over the forged signature, as if covering it could make it vanish. But it didn't vanish. Neither did the betrayal. That night I confronted David. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look ashamed. He swirled the ice in his glass and said, "Mom, it's just numbers. Paperwork. Everyone does it." "Everyone but me," I whispered. He leaned forward, his expression calm, businesslike. "Mom, it's our house. We're family. Everything's shared." Across the room, Vanessa smirked. She tapped her manicured nails against her glass in a slow rhythm, like she was counting down to something. I stared at the man who had once fallen asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms, who used to tug my hand and beg me to stay by his side. Now he was the man calmly explaining that my life, my security, my home were no longer mine. The silence between us was heavier than shouting could ever be. When they left that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The papers lay spread out in front of me, each page whispering the same truth. I had been erased. I gathered them into a neat stack and placed them in Robert's box of blueprints. His dreams and their lies side by side. The box was heavier than it should have been. Not with weight but with meaning. I pressed my hands against the lid and whispered, "What would you do, Robert?" The clock ticked. The house creaked. No answer came. But I already knew. This was no longer my home. It was theirs, the bank's, David's, Vanessa's. All I had left was the echo of what it had been. The foreclosure notice came soon after, nailed to my front door for all the neighbors to see. And with it, the day I hit rock bottom. The day they thought I'd finally disappear. The day they came for my house was bright, almost cheerful. The kind of Florida morning where the sun makes the palms glow and children ride bikes in the street. It should have been ordinary. But when the sheriff's car pulled up to the curb, it became the day everything I thought was permanent slipped through my fingers. 2 deputies stepped out. They weren't unkind, but they weren't sentimental either. To them, I was just a line in a foreclosure order. "Ma'am," one said softly, "you'll need to gather your belongings." Belongings. Such a small word for the weight of a life. I looked around my living room, still arranged just as Robert and I had left it. The grandfather clock he had repaired ticked steadily, its chime echoing like a heartbeat. The rocking chair he had built with his own hands sat in the corner, the cushion flattened from years of use. My china cabinet gleamed in the sunlight, the dishes we had saved for one piece at a time, never splurging, always building slowly. Now it was all someone else's. I moved through the house in a daze, choosing what I could carry. A duffel bag of clothes, a worn photo album filled with birthdays and graduations, and Robert's box of papers, blueprints, sketches, notes he had once made about houses he dreamed of restoring. Everything else stayed behind. Decades of living reduced to 2 bags and a box. Outside, neighbors lingered. Mrs. Parker pretended to trim her roses, though her eyes never left me. Mr. Jenkins slowed his dog's walk so he could pass by twice. Their whispers weren't cruel, but they cut all the same. "That poor woman," I heard someone murmur. Poor. That word stung more than foreclosure. When the movers hired by the bank carried out the furniture, I felt my dignity leave with each piece. My dining table, where Robert and I had celebrated anniversaries with cheap champagne, loaded into the back of a truck. My bed, where I had dreamed, cried, prayed, gone. Every slam of the truck door was another reminder that my life no longer belonged to me. By noon I was standing on the curb, my bags at my feet, my box clutched to my chest. Behind me, the door I had walked through thousands of times closed with a hollow finality. The deputies nodded politely, their job done. And just like that, I was homeless. The trailer I found on the edge of town was the cheapest I could manage. $200 a month for 4 aluminum walls and a mattress that sagged like an old hammock. The air smelled faintly of mildew. The lamp flickered when I turned it on. I sat down on the couch, the kind of couch you don't sink into so much as collapse onto. It was lumpy, threadbare, and smelled faintly of dust. I pulled my wallet from my bag and counted what I had left. $912. That was it. My safety net, my future, my survival, all reduced to a number smaller than the mortgage payment I used to write each month without thinking. I slipped the bills into an old coffee tin and hid it under the sink. My mother had done the same during lean years, hiding cash away where no one could steal it. Somehow it felt like the right ritual now. At night, I slept on that sagging couch, Robert's box on the floor beside me. The box became my anchor. I would reach out in the dark just to feel its corners under my fingertips, to remind myself that something of him was still with me. Inside were his notes, addresses, sketches, and lists of properties he had once dreamed of buying. At the time, they seemed like ashes of dreams too heavy to carry. The trailer groaned and creaked with every gust of wind. Through the thin walls, I could hear my neighbor coughing. I could hear another arguing with his wife. The soundtrack of the forgotten. I cried often that first week. Not for poverty, I had lived lean before, but for betrayal. For the humiliation of being cast out like trash. For the sight of Vanessa driving past in her gleaming SUV, pretending not to see me standing on the curb with my bags. For David, my son, the boy who had once clung to me during thunderstorms, now the man who had handed my house over to the bank like it was nothing more than a set of numbers. But tears dry eventually, and when they do, something else takes their place. Resolve. I didn't know yet how I would climb out of that trailer. I didn't know when or what it would cost me. But I knew one thing with certainty. David and Vanessa believed they had erased me. They hadn't. This wasn't my ending. It was the bottom of the well. And sometimes the only direction left is up. And what came next would be the first rung of the ladder. The trailer was cold that night. The kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones no matter how many blankets you pile on. I couldn't sleep. The couch springs dug into my back, and the silence pressed too heavily, broken only by the cough of the man next door. I reached down and pulled Robert's box onto my lap. I had carried it from the house like it was treasure, though at the time I couldn't have explained why. It smelled faintly of sawdust, the way his shirts always did when he came home from work. Inside were his notes, sketches of half-built houses, measurements scrawled in the margins, scraps of paper covered with numbers. At the bottom was a battered notebook filled with addresses. Next to each was a single word, distressed. Robert had kept a list of properties he once dreamed of buying. Foreclosed homes, abandoned lots, places most people overlooked. He never had the money to act on it. But he had seen something others didn't, potential. For the first time since the deputies had locked me out of my own home, I felt something stir inside me. What if his dream could become my lifeline? The next morning I walked to the library. The building had become my refuge. The one place with free air conditioning, free internet, and silence thick enough to think. I looked up the addresses Robert had written down. Most of them were still there. Same streets, same cracked paint, same notices taped to the windows. Forgotten houses left behind like I had been. The more I read, the more a thought took root. Banks saw these homes as burdens. What if I saw them the way Robert had? As beginnings. That night, lying awake on the couch, I whispered to myself, if they can turn my house into paperwork, I can turn their paperwork into opportunity. It was just an idea then, fragile as a sprout breaking through the dirt. But it was enough to make me sit up straighter. Of course, an idea isn't money. My $912 wouldn't last long. I needed work. The only job I could find was at a local real estate office cleaning. $12 an hour, 3 evenings a week. I wore rubber gloves and carried a bucket, wiping down desks that gleamed with the reflections of other people's fortunes. It wasn't glamorous. Some nights I scrubbed coffee stains off the carpet, wondering if this was all I had left. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. The agents didn't notice me. To them, I was invisible, the old woman with a mop. And because I was invisible, they talked freely. I listened while I polished the glass doors. Bank auction next Thursday. Starting bid under 1,000. Another foreclosure coming in on Maple Street. Should be quick turnover. Easy money if you've got the stomach for it. Their voices sank into me, each word a seed. I didn't understand everything. Escrow, liens, REOs. But I wrote the terms on scraps of paper and looked them up at the library later. I filled notebook after notebook with definitions, rules, patterns. It was like learning a foreign language, but one I was desperate to master. The more I learned, the less I felt like a victim. One evening while emptying the trash, I overheard two brokers laughing. Guy bought a foreclosure last year for $900. Flipped it for 30 grand after a coat of paint. Their laughter stung, but not because they were mocking me. It stung because I realized something. $900. The exact amount I had hidden in a coffee tin under my trailer sink. It wasn't enough for a new house. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough for a start. When I returned home that night, I pulled Robert's notebook out of the box again. I traced my finger over one of the addresses, whispering his words as if he were sitting beside me. Build slow but build solid. Tears burned my eyes, but this time they weren't just grief. They were something sharper. Determination. I set the notebook down on the wobbly trailer table, opened a fresh page in mine, and wrote 3 words in bold letters. Second chance. Properties. Me. The seed had been planted. The first auction I attended felt more like a circus than a business. Men in pressed suits tapped their pens against clipboards. Women in sharp heels scrolled on their phones as if they weren't about to gamble on entire houses. And then there was me. A 71-year-old woman in a thrift store dress, clutching a coffee tin of crumpled bills I'd hidden under my trailer sink. $912, that was all I had. I sat in the back, heart pounding. The auctioneer rattled off numbers at machine gun speed. Properties rolled across the screen. Foreclosures, repossessions, forgotten places nobody wanted until they saw a chance to flip them for profit. When the address flashed up, Maple Street, I froze. Robert's handwriting filled my memory. That address was in his notebook. He had circled it, written good bones in the margin. Starting bid. $900. I thought my heart might stop. Hands shot up around the room. But then nothing. No one wanted it. Too rundown. Too much work. Too much risk. All in, all done, the auctioneer barked. I raised my hand. My voice trembled. 912. The gavel came down like thunder. Sold. I walked out of that building with a slip of paper that said I owned a house. A house. Me. The woman who had been sleeping on a sagging couch in a trailer now had property in her name again. It wasn't much. When I stepped inside for the first time, the air smelled of mildew and rot. The wallpaper peeled like tired skin. The floor sagged near the kitchen. But it was mine. I ran my hand along the dusty windowsill, feeling the grit between my fingers. We'll build slow, but we'll build solid, I whispered, repeating Robert's words. And for the first time in months I felt alive. I couldn't afford contractors. So I rolled up my sleeves. I scrubbed floors until my knees ached. I painted walls with brushes bought on clearance. I patched holes with YouTube tutorials playing on a borrowed phone. Neighbors watched me with a mix of pity and amusement. Crazy old woman thinks she's Bob the Builder, I heard one mutter. Maybe I was. But crazy was better than broken. I spent the winter bringing that house back to life. Piece by piece, dollar by dollar. Every day, I returned to my trailer with sore muscles and paint-stained hands. And every morning I went back determined. The house began to change. The smell of rot gave way to fresh paint. The sagging floor stiffened under new boards. The windows gleamed. And with every nail I hammered, I felt myself coming back together too. By spring, a small miracle had taken shape. What had once been a ruin now looked like a home. Not perfect, not polished, but alive again. When a young couple stopped by and asked if it was for sale, I laughed. Everything is for sale at the right price, I said. They offered $25,000. I nearly dropped the pen when I signed the papers. I walked away with a check in my hand and tears in my eyes. $912 had turned into $25,000. For most people in that auction room it was pocket change. For me it was proof. Proof that being thrown away didn't mean worthless. Proof that starting over at 71 wasn't impossible. Proof that Robert had been right. Those houses, those forgotten places, they had good bones. And so did I. That night, back in the trailer, I placed the check beside Robert's box. "This is for you," I whispered. "And this is just the beginning. Because if I could turn scraps into something solid once, I could do it again. And next time it wouldn't just be survival. It would be victory." 5 years. That's how long it took to turn a coffee tin of crumpled bills into something the newspapers called an empire. Second Chance Properties. That was the name I chose. Because that's what I was giving houses and myself, both written off as worthless, a second chance to live again. After selling the Maple Street house, I reinvested immediately. Another foreclosure, another wreck nobody wanted. This time I wasn't afraid. I patched, painted, replaced, and sold again. Then again. Soon I realized sweat alone wouldn't scale. I needed leverage. The very thing that had once destroyed me, loans, was now the tool I learned to wield. Only this time I was the one in control. I studied interest rates the way some people study scripture. I negotiated with banks that once treated me like trash. I signed loan papers with a steady hand, always calculating, always remembering the day I'd been erased by signatures that weren't mine. Funny how the same ink that nearly ruined me was now the ink building my future. By the end of year 2, I'd flipped 6 houses. By year 3, 15. I brought on young workers who didn't mind learning from a grandmother who could swing a hammer better than most of them. By year 4, I had partners. Contractors, brokers, even city officials who once ignored me now called to offer me first pick on properties. By year 5, Second Chance Properties had a portfolio of 37 homes across Sarasota County. Some flipped, some rented, some held as long-term investments. My net worth crossed into 7 figures. And the same banks that once nailed foreclosure notices to my door? They now sent me fruit baskets at Christmas. "Funny," I'd tell Claire, my accountant, as we unwrapped another tin of expensive cookies. "The bank that once threw me out now thanks me for keeping their books in the black." Word spread. The Herald Tribune ran a headline. 71-year-old widow becomes millionaire real estate investor. Reporters wanted interviews. Photographers wanted my picture in front of houses I'd saved. "Mrs. Mitchell," one journalist asked, "how does it feel to succeed so late in life?" I smiled thinly. Better late than never. And better on my terms than on theirs. They thought they were writing a feel-good story. They didn't realize they were documenting revenge brick by brick. I kept Robert's box in my office, still filled with his old notes. Every time I signed a deed, I touched the lid. Every time I deposited another check, I whispered, "We're building, Robert. Slow but solid." And every time David's name crossed my mind, I reminded myself, this wasn't just business. This was survival sharpened into justice. By the end of that 5th year, I stood in front of a warehouse I'd converted into headquarters. The sign above the door read, "Second Chance Properties." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Because nothing truly worthless stays that way." The woman who once slept on a sagging couch in a trailer now signed million-dollar deals without blinking. And yet deep down I knew the story wasn't finished. Because while I was building my empire, David and Vanessa were busy building their own downfall. And soon enough our paths would collide again. It started with whispers. Vanessa's SUV vanished from the driveway one morning, repo. Then a tax lien notice, bright orange and taped to their door. By the time Claire slid the public filings across my desk, I already knew what was coming. 2 credit cards in default. A payroll tax issue from David's consulting venture. And finally, the one page that mattered. Notice of sale. Their house, the one I had once been forbidden to enter, was scheduled for auction in 31 days. Claire's question was simple. "Do you want it?" Second Chance Properties had the funds. The company could bid quietly, cleanly. No one would ever know until I decided to tell them. "Yes," I said. Auction day was suffocatingly hot. Investors fanned themselves with bid cards, murmuring about roofing costs and school districts. I sat in the back, sunglasses on, a cashier's check in my purse. "Next item. 47 Westmere Lane," the auctioneer announced. Hands lifted. Numbers climbed. 220. 35. 240. And then the crowd thinned. One last bidder hesitated, glanced at his phone and dropped out. 246, I called. The gavel fell. Sold. To Second Chance Properties. Just like that, the house David and Vanessa once locked me out of now belonged to me. 10 days later, the keys were in my hand. I walked the empty rooms alone. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and panic. Nail holes dotted the walls where their family photos once hung. The den window still had the chip from when David and I had once shoved a couch through it, laughing until we cried. I set a small fern on the kitchen island and locked the door behind me. It was mine again, not as a mother but as a landlord. The letter went out the next morning. Dear occupants of 47 Westmere Lane, please be advised your property has transferred ownership. Remittance is now due to Second Chance Properties. You have 30 days to vacate or sign a rental agreement. I didn't need to see their faces to know what that envelope did to them. Rage, panic, and finally fear. 2 days later, David's number lit up my phone. I let it ring. Then Vanessa called. And called again. By week's end, a formal dinner invitation arrived in my mailbox. Family dinner. Saturday, 6 p.m. No apologies. No explanations. Just desperation wrapped in linen napkins. I smiled as I slid the invitation into my bag along with the deed. Because dinner was coming. And dessert would be served with the truth. The invitation had been written on cream cardstock. The kind you buy when you're desperate to look respectable. Family dinner. Saturday, 6 p.m. I arrived on time carrying nothing but my handbag and a calm smile. David opened the door, his face pale. His suit jacket hanging loose like it belonged to another man. Vanessa hovered behind him, her perfume heavy enough to cover the fear in her eyes. Mom, David said, forcing a smile. Thank you for coming. Of course, I replied smoothly. Family dinners are important. Aren't they, Vanessa? Her lips tightened. Yes, very important. The dining room table was dressed for performance. Candles, linen napkins, the silver set I had given them as a wedding gift years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emma and Tony sat stiffly, teenagers caught in the crossfire of something they didn't yet understand. Emma poked at her salad. Tony drummed his fingers against the table until Vanessa snapped, "Stop it!" Her voice cracked a little. We ate in brittle silence until David finally set down his fork. Mom, he began, clearing his throat. We're in trouble. I lost my job. Vanessa's been trying to hold everything together, but the bills are too much, Vanessa cut in. She leaned forward, her smile brittle, her tone dripping with false warmth. You have such a big house now, Mom. Too much space for one person. We thought maybe we could move in, just until we get back on our feet. Emma glanced up, eyes wide. Tony muttered, "Move in," under his breath. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. Move in? That's interesting. Because as of last week, you already live in my house. David blinked. What? I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Go ahead. Take a look. David opened it, confusion clouding his face. Vanessa leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the bold words. Certificate of sale. Transfer of deed. Rental agreement. Her fork slipped from her hand and clattered against the china. What is this? She demanded, her voice sharp now, no sugar left. It means, I said, savoring every word. You're looking at your new landlord. The room fell silent except for the hiss of the candles. Emma's fork froze midair. Tony looked between us, trying to piece it together. That's not possible, David whispered. How could you? You missed payments, I said evenly. You let the bank circle like vultures. I bought the property at auction. Clean, legal, simple. Second Chance Properties is the owner, which means I am the owner. Vanessa's cheeks flushed scarlet. This is revenge. You waited for us to fall and swooped in like a vulture. You've wanted this all along. No, I said softly, leaning forward. This isn't revenge. This is justice. Revenge would have been leaving you on the curb with your furniture piled around you. Justice is letting you stay as long as you pay. Like everyone else. Emma's voice was small. Grandma, do we really not own our house anymore? I looked at her, my heart aching for the innocence in her question. No, sweetheart. Your parents don't. But I do. And you'll always have a roof over your head, whether they deserve it or not. David's jaw clenched. You planned this. From the beginning. I met his eyes, calm and unshaking. No, David. You planned this the day you forged my name on loan papers. You wrote me out of my own life. You thought I'd disappear. Instead, I turned that lesson into power. And now? You sit in my house at my table asking for help. Vanessa slammed her palm against the table, rattling the silverware. We are your family. You can't do this to us. Family. I let the word linger in the air. Family doesn't lock their mother out. Family doesn't lie, steal, or erase. Family doesn't laugh while their children lose everything. Don't stand there and preach family when you threw that word away years ago. Tony finally spoke, his voice shaking. So what happens now? Now, I said, rising slowly from my chair, your parents have a choice. Sign a lease, pay rent on time, or hand me the keys and be out in 30 days. Vanessa pushed back her chair violently. We won't be humiliated like this. Then leave, I replied. The locks will change either way. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Grandma, can we still see you? I softened just for her. Always, I promised. But from now on, visits will be on my terms, not theirs. I gathered the folder, sliding it back into my bag. As I walked to the door, I looked back one last time. David sat slumped, his face drained of all fight. Vanessa's hand shook with fury she couldn't put into words. And the children, they stared at me, not with fear but with something else. Respect. They had thought this dinner would end with me offering them shelter. Instead, they learned the truth. They already lived under my roof. And I wasn't the woman begging for scraps anymore. I was the landlord. Owning a house is simple. Owning the truth is harder. For weeks after that dinner, David and Vanessa tried every angle. Pleas, threats, guilt, silence. None of it worked. I had learned to stop negotiating with people who only saw me as a resource. They signed the lease. Market rent due on the 1st. And for the first time in their lives, they had to answer to me. Every month, the check arrived in my office mailbox with their names scrawled in uneven handwriting. Every month, Claire smiled as she logged the payment into the system. And every month, I felt a justice deeper than any court ruling. The very son who had once taken my roof now had to pay for the privilege of living under it. Emma and Tony came to visit on weekends. At first cautiously, like they weren't sure if they were welcome. But soon my house echoed with laughter again. Teenagers raiding my fridge, helping me in the garden, teasing me about my landlord title. Grandma, Tony asked one Saturday while hauling mulch, do you like making them pay you rent? I looked at him carefully. I don't enjoy their struggle, Tony. I enjoy knowing I can't be erased again. That's a lesson they needed. Emma nodded slowly. They don't talk about it much. But I think they're scared of you. Good, I said, wiping my hands on my gloves. Fear is a start. Respect comes next. David avoided me at first, embarrassed each time we crossed paths in the driveway. He looked older, worn down, a man who had gambled and lost. One evening, when he came to deliver the rent in person, he lingered on my porch. Mom, he said quietly, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I met his eyes. Forgiveness is a gift, David. It has to be earned. Right now, what I need isn't apologies. It's proof you can live with the consequences you created.